We have millions of yards of dirt that needs to get moved every year, or else it's going to just load up the last few years. And that makes me really nervous if something goes wrong, right?
17 minutes. That's all that stood between Parker Schnabel and complete disaster, and the moment that ultimately handed him a $50 million jackpot. Most people think gold mining is about luck or big machines. It isn't. In this case, it was about a quiet war fought through leaked documents, forgotten journals from the 1980s, and a frantic truck run that felt more like an action movie than a mining season. Rick Ness had been banned. His entire operation was frozen. But he wasn't finished. Not even close. What no one realized at the time was that the ground itself was shifting, and when it stopped, only one of them would still be standing. This wasn't just about cameras going dark or equipment being shut down. Rick Ness didn't merely lose a permit. He was hit with a ban, unlike anything the Yukon mining world had ever seen. One moment, Rick was preparing for the biggest push of his season. The next, chaos erupted because of a document that was never supposed to exist outside a closed system. It was a confidential mining compliance memo. No signature, no routing number, no official stamp. Somehow, it surfaced late at night on a quiet corner of an obscure industry forum. The timestamp showed it had been created months before seasonal permits were even open. And right there in the middle of the page, in bold letters, was a phrase no one in Yukon mining had ever seen applied to an active miner. Pre-disqualified Rick Ness. Whoever wrote it clearly believed it would stay buried. They were wrong. Someone decided that night was the moment to expose everything. What made the memo even stranger was the violation code it cited, a string of numbers that didn't match any known section of the Mining Conduct and Compliance Act. Regulators, historians, and even retired inspectors began digging through decades of Yukon mining law. Nothing matched. It was as if the code had been invented on the spot, quietly slipped into an internal system no outsider was ever meant to see. Whispers started circulating. Was the document real? Or had someone been laying a legal trap long before Rick even set foot on his claim this season? The leak didn't explode all at once. It spread slowly, like smoke, drifting through inboxes and late-night group chats across the territory. Meanwhile, Rick was still focused on the ground. His priority wasn't rumors, it was finding the pay layer. His crew was finally closing in on a promising rim, unaware that everything was about to change. That changed the moment a copy of the memo landed on the desk of Parker Schnabel's geological strategist. Within minutes, a private call went out, not to Parker himself, but to a senior operator on his crew. The message was brief and unsettling. Monitor the eastern perimeter at sunrise. No explanation, no context. By dawn, the Yukon rumor mill was fully awake. One thing was clear, something major had been set in motion. Whether it was a mistake, sabotage, or the opening move in a hostile takeover, no one could say. Across the valley, Parker's drone team began their routine sweep and immediately noticed something wrong. Rick Ness's wash plant cameras, normally running around the clock, were frozen. Not offline, not disconnected. Just locked on a single frame from 16 hours earlier. That wasn't a glitch. Someone had shut things down from the inside. The drones widened their sweep. Abandoned fuel drums sat crooked in the dirt. Conveyors were coated with untouched pay gravel. Hoses lay coiled as if someone had simply walked away mid-shift. It didn't look like a planned shutdown. It looked like an operation that had hit a wall. Hard. Parker's foreman studied the data, trying to make sense of it. Was Rick hiding a discovery? Or had someone forced his hand? Parker didn't answer. He didn't even look at the footage. Instead, he walked straight to the seismic monitor, a tool most mining crews ignore because it takes real expertise to interpret. He tapped the screen, zoomed in, and focused on the boundary line between his ground and Rick's. The readings weren't surface noise. They weren't machinery vibrations. Something heavy was moving underground. The pattern only appeared when the earth was settling over a geological structure that had recently been disturbed. "Get a monitoring team out there," Parker said calmly, but everyone around him could hear the tension beneath his voice. He didn't sound like a man spotting an opportunity. He sounded like someone who had been expecting this. The graphs kept pulsing, faint, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat coming from deep within the ground. Whatever was happening, it wasn't small. What Parker didn't know was that Rick was already fighting back. By midnight, Rick's inner crew gathered inside an old equipment shed. The generators were off. The claim was completely dark. Headlamps cast sharp reflections off rusted metal walls. Rick stood in the center, holding the ban notice on a cracked tablet. He slowly rotated the screen so everyone could see the digital signature at the bottom. It was blurred. Not by accident, by design. It looked auto-generated, the kind of placeholder used for internal drafts, not legally binding orders. "They didn't sign it," Rick said quietly. "Someone hadn't wanted to." A mechanic at the back stepped forward, clearly shaken. Earlier that day, he'd overheard a mining board agent speaking in rushed whispers on the phone. One name stood out, a name that didn't appear anywhere on the public roster. They said the shutdown had to happen before the window closed, the mechanic explained. At first, he thought they meant the weather. Now he wasn't so sure. The shed fell silent. Rick understood there were only two reasons someone would rush a ban like this. Either he had already hit something incredibly valuable, or someone wanted him gone before he did. The crew made a decision immediately. If the ban stood, even temporarily, the board could legally seize all active geological data from Rick's operation. And that was something Rick Ness wasn't about to let happen. That meant everything had to go. Core samples, drill logs, seismic readings, every scrap of data. The crew split into pairs, moving quietly through the darkness, gathering every core tube, vial, and binder that showed even a trace of mineralization. The samples were packed into an old utility truck with its headlights taped over. Rick ordered all radio communication shut down immediately. Any active frequency could be traced. GPS units were switched to encrypted mode, a protocol Rick had only ever used once before. As the truck rumbled away carrying the evidence, Rick paused alone, looking across the valley towards the distant glow of Parker's lights. He didn't yet know about the leaked memo, the violation code that didn't exist, or the seismic anomalies Parker had already spotted. He knew only one thing for certain: someone wanted him erased, not slowed down, not pushed aside, completely gone. And while the Yukon slept beneath the soft shimmer of the northern lights, two mining operations were quietly moving toward a collision. Rick guarded his core samples like evidence in a criminal case, unaware that Parker had already identified the first signs of a geological pattern that only appears once every few decades. The missing piece surfaced in an unexpected place: a forgotten journal. It was bound in worn leather, its yellowed pages filled with handwritten notes and coordinates scribbled into the margins. The journal came from a box of estate papers purchased at auction by a retired prospector. Inside was something Yukon geologists insist shouldn't exist: a twisted subchannel that bent, looped, and shifted every few hundred feet, creating natural gold traps capable of holding wealth for thousands of years. The sketch inside, hurried but precise, mapped a structure identical to the one Rick's final drill hole had pierced just before everything went dark. It was the link neither man knew was missing. Rick studied the journal by the dim light inside his truck, turning each page carefully. Whoever pushed the ban knew exactly what he was close to. This wasn't about compliance. The ban was a tactical move, meant to lock him in place before he could reach the exact point the journal described. One phrase appeared 3 times in the handwriting: "Once it bends, it empties." Rick didn't fully understand it, but his instincts told him enough. Across the valley, the mood inside Parker's mobile command trailer had shifted into controlled chaos. Parker had just received a text from an unknown number. His claim is not protected. Clock is running. There was no explanation and no follow-up, but Parker didn't need one. His eyes went straight back to the seismic map. He activated a protocol he hadn't used in years: Operation Aftershock, a land positioning strategy designed to move into vulnerable ground before competitors even realized the boundaries had changed. And it wasn't subtle. His crews moved with military precision. 2 full teams were pulled from the Big Red Cut. 3 dozers were rerouted. A wash plant was hitched to a transporter with orders to move before sunrise. His foreman stared in disbelief. Mid-season moves like this simply didn't happen. But Parker felt something he rarely admitted out loud. Instinct. The anonymous message, the shutdown, the seismic pulse, the mapping anomalies. They were all parts of the same invisible chain reaction. Rick was still reading the map. Parker was already redrawing it with heavy equipment. 2 miners, 1 truth. Rick walked into the mining board building for what was officially called a temporary status justification hearing, a procedural tool reserved for catastrophic events like mine collapses or toxic spills. It had never been used for a routine seasonal miner. The room felt wrong, too formal, too quiet. The board members sat stiffly, eyes down, papers aligned with unnatural precision. Rick took his seat without speaking, letting the silence do the work. When he finally asked to see the evidence supporting the ban, the hesitation was immediate. One official shuffled papers without looking up. Another cleared her throat. Rick leaned forward, his voice calm but sharp. "You shut down an active operation without evidence. So who gave the order?" That was when one of them slipped. A middle-aged board member let frustration bleed through his professional tone. "Certain interests felt your claim location presented complications," he said, then stopped, realizing too late what he'd revealed. Location. Not behavior, not violations. Location. In that instant, everything clicked. The ban wasn't about safety or compliance, it was about territory. Freezing Rick's operation just long enough for someone else to move in before he understood what he had drilled into. But the moment Rick walked out of that hearing room, the board realized they no longer controlled the chain reaction they had started. Across town, Rick's phone lit up with a number he didn't recognize. It belonged to a former territorial mining inspector who had retired after calling out the wrong political donor. The man spoke in coded language. Protocol 7B. Rick's blood ran cold. No one filed a 7B unless they were concealing a land shift. Weeks earlier, Rick had noticed tiny inconsistencies in boundary data, almost invisible differences. The inspector explained, a micro-scale tectonic slip, barely detectable, had nudged boundary markers just enough to redirect projected mineral channels on official maps. The shift placed the richest predicted zone directly along Parker's claim line, but not entirely within Parker's ground. Rick rushed back to his workspace, tearing through stacks of reports. He pulled every core sample from the past 2 seasons, seismic charts, hand-drawn sketches, density scans, and modern geological overlays. Piece by piece, he built a case so thorough it looked less like mining research and more like a criminal investigation. Meanwhile, Parker's camp was assembling its own scientific firepower. His drone teams ran continuous LiDAR sweeps over the buffer zone, stitching the data into a multi-layered terrain model with sub-centimeter precision. The results directly contradicted Rick's findings. According to Parker's scans, the gold-bearing corridor dipped sharply under Parker's side of the claim alone, completely bypassing Rick's drill sites. Someone's data was wrong, or someone had access to information the public was never meant to see. When Parker arrived before the board with his sleek digital presentation, he carried himself with the calm confidence of a man who believed the ground itself had already chosen his side. Rick walked in moments later, carrying weathered binders and the old journal. The tension in the room was immediate. High-resolution digital terrain models clashed with hand-drawn sketches. One geological reality collided with another. Rick slammed his hand on the table and accused Parker of using restricted geological maps. Parker fired back without hesitation, dismissing Rick's findings as outdated and rooted in myth rather than modern data. The board tried to regain control, but it was too late. 2 miners, 2 datasets, 2 irreconcilable versions of the truth. Caught between them was a gold corridor that defied every geological rule ever written. The meeting didn't end with a verdict. It ended in gridlock. With no legal interpretation able to settle the dispute, the board invoked the final option allowed under Yukon law, a provisional extraction test. Ownership would go to the miner who physically exposed the corridor first. No appeals, no reinterpretations. The lawyer stepped aside. Now the machines would decide. The moment the ruling was announced, the valley exploded into motion. Parker deployed his crews with ruthless efficiency. Operators shaved the ground layer by layer, cutting perfectly angled trenches. Every 20 minutes, Parker recalibrated, reading the earth like a living map. The legal battle had torn straight into the soil. Rick responded with a different approach. He ordered a single deep test hole drilled directly into the heart of the corridor. At 30 feet, the drill hit dense black sand, the unmistakable signature of an ancient, high-pressure gold channel. Rick signaled to keep going. The rig shook violently as it chewed through compressed history. Both crews pushed their equipment to the limit. Then, chaos erupted on both sides at the same time. Parker's grizzly bars roared as massive boulders slammed down, coated in thick sheets of visible gold, the richest material he had ever seen. Across the valley, Rick's drill blew out. A geyser of black sand and coarse gold shot into the air, nuggets the size of marbles hammering the catchpan like hail. It was a dead heat. 2 crews, 2 undeniable discoveries, perfectly simultaneous. But the Yukon board didn't care about ties. They cared about paperwork. What followed was a frantic race to Dawson. 2 trucks tore down the access road, the fate of the season rattling in the passenger seats. In the end, it all came down to 17 minutes. Parker's samples reached the board desk 17 minutes before Rick's. That tiny sliver of time, less than a lunch break, granted Parker full extraction rights to the entire corridor. Rick's ban was overturned, and his geological theory was proven correct. But the gold was no longer his. Rick Ness won the moral victory. Parker Schnabel walked away with the $50 million jackpot. So the question remains, was this simply a case of faster logistics deciding the outcome? Or had the timing been quietly engineered from the very beginning to favor the larger operation?